The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Windsor Castle as William walked briskly through the corridors. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each step more determined than the last. The prince had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with the conversation he'd overheard between two palace staff members in the garden. Catherine had been struggling for months. The constant pressure from certain members of the royal family, the whispered comments about her background, and the subtle undermining of her position had taken its toll. William had watched his wife's bright smile fade gradually, replaced by a forced politeness that broke his heart. The previous evening, Catherine had excused herself early from dinner, claiming a headache. William had found her later in their private quarters, sitting by the window with tears streaming down her face. She had tried to hide them, quickly wiping her cheeks and forcing a smile, but William knew better. "What's wrong, darling?" he had asked, sitting beside her on the window seat. Catherine had shaken her head, unable to speak at first. When she finally found her voice, it was barely a whisper. "I don't think I belong here, William. No matter what I do, it's never enough." The pain in her voice had cut through William like a knife. His wife, the woman he loved more than life itself, was being made to feel unwelcome in what should have been her home. The thought of anyone making Catherine feel this way filled him with a rage he had never experienced before. That night, as Catherine slept fitfully beside him, William had made a decision. He would not stand by and watch the woman he loved be torn down by palace politics and petty jealousies. He had heard the rumors, seen the subtle slights, and witnessed the way certain family members treated his wife with barely concealed disdain. Now, as he walked toward the Queen Consort's private sitting room, William's jaw was set with determination. The conversation he was about to have would be difficult, perhaps even explosive, but it was long overdue. Too much had been said, too many lines had been crossed, and too many tears had been shed. He paused outside the ornate doors of Camilla's sitting room, hearing the soft murmur of voices inside. Taking a deep breath, William knocked firmly and waited for permission to enter. The voices inside stopped abruptly, and after a moment, Camilla's voice called out for him to come in. William opened the door to find Camilla seated at her writing desk, a cup of tea cooling beside her. She looked up with surprise, clearly not expecting the prince at this early hour. Her secretary, who had been standing nearby with a stack of correspondence, quickly gathered the papers and excused herself from the room. "William, what a pleasant surprise," Camilla said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "I wasn't expecting you this morning." William closed the door behind him with deliberate care, the soft click of the latch somehow ominous in the sudden silence. He didn't take the seat that Camilla gestured toward, instead remaining standing near the door, his hands clasped behind his back. "We need to talk, Camilla," William said, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone that made the Queen Consort shift uncomfortably in her chair. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" she replied, attempting to maintain her usual warm tone, though William could see the wariness creeping into her eyes. William walked slowly across the room, his gaze never leaving Camilla's face. The morning light streaming through the tall windows caught the tension in his features, highlighting the determined set of his jaw and the steel in his blue eyes. "It's about Catherine," he said simply, and he saw Camilla's expression change almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something passed across her features before she composed herself again. "Catherine? What about her? I hope she's feeling better after last night." She seemed rather under the weather at dinner. William's eyes narrowed slightly. "She wasn't under the weather, and you know it." The pretense fell away from Camilla's face like a mask being removed. She set down her teacup with a soft clink and folded her hands in her lap, meeting William's gaze directly. "I'm not sure what you're implying, William." "I'm not implying anything," William replied, his voice growing stronger. "I'm stating facts. Catherine has been made to feel unwelcome in this family, and it stops now." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Camilla's fingers drummed once against her knee before she stilled them, her expression becoming more guarded. "Catherine is a lovely girl, William. We all care about her very much." "Caring and showing care are two different things," William shot back, finally, moving closer to where Camilla sat. "And, from what I've witnessed, there's been precious little of the latter." Camilla's composure began to crack slightly. "I think you may be misreading the situation, dear. Palace life is complicated, and adjustments take time. Catherine has been adjusting beautifully." "Adjusting?" William's voice rose slightly, though he quickly controlled it. "She shouldn't have to adjust to being treated as less than. She shouldn't have to adjust to snide comments and deliberate exclusions. She shouldn't have to adjust to being made to feel like an outsider in her own home. The accusation hung in the air between them like a challenge. Camilla's face flushed slightly, and, for the first time since William had entered the room, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. "William, I think you're being rather dramatic. Catherine has been welcomed into this family with open arms." "Has she?" William asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because that's not what I've seen. That's not what Catherine has experienced. And that's certainly not what the staff have been whispering about in the corridors." Camilla's eyes flashed at the mention of staff gossip, and William knew he had struck a nerve. The palace staff saw everything, heard everything, and their loyalty was ultimately to the crown, not to individual members of the family who might be causing discord. "I cannot control what staff members choose to discuss in their free time," Camilla said stiffly. "But you can control your own actions and words," William replied firmly. "And you can certainly control the atmosphere you create around Catherine." The confrontation was building to something larger, something that would reshape the dynamics within the royal family. William could feel it in the charged air of the room, in the way Camilla's carefully maintained composure was beginning to slip, in the weight of all the unspoken grievances that were finally being brought into the light. Outside, the morning was growing brighter, but inside the queen consort's sitting room, storm clouds were gathering. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the explosion that was surely coming. Camilla stood up abruptly from her chair, the movement sharp and defensive. The careful mask of royal composure she had worn for years was beginning to crack under William's steady gaze and pointed accusations. "I resent the implication that I have been anything other than welcoming to Catherine," she said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "I have gone out of my way to include her, to help her understand her role." William's laugh was bitter and short. "Include her? Is that what you call deliberately scheduling events when you know she can't attend? Is that what you call making decisions about charitable patronages without consulting her? Is that what you call the little comments about her family's background?" Each question hit its mark, and William could see Camilla's jaw tighten with each one. She turned away from him, walking toward the window that overlooked the castle's private gardens. "Catherine's background is different from what we're accustomed to," Camilla said carefully, her back still turned to William. "There are certain protocols, certain expectations that take time to learn. Don't you dare," William's voice cracked like a whip across the room. "Don't you dare use her background as an excuse for your behavior. Catherine has conducted herself with more grace and dignity than many who were born into this life." Camilla spun around, her own temper finally beginning to show. "She doesn't understand the complexities of royal life, William. She makes mistakes, says the wrong things, doesn't know the proper procedures. Someone has to guide her. Guide her, yes. Humiliate her, no." William stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "There's a difference between helping someone learn and making them feel small. And you've been doing the latter." The air in the room crackled with tension. Years of carefully maintained politeness were dissolving in the face of William's protective fury and Camilla's defensive anger. "I have been nothing but patient with her," Camilla insisted, but her voice lacked conviction now. "Patient?" William's eyebrows rose in disbelief. "Is it patient to correct her publicly at state dinners? Is it patient to make pointed comments about proper etiquette in front of other family members? Is it patient to exclude her from planning meetings for events she's supposed to participate in?" Camilla's face flushed deeper. She needed to learn. She needed support. William's voice rose again, echoing off the high ceilings. She needed someone to help her navigate this world, not someone waiting to pounce on every small mistake. The queen consort moved back to her desk, her hands gripping the edge as if she needed the support. "You're making me sound like some sort of villain, William. That's not fair, isn't it?" William challenged. "Tell me, when was the last time you went out of your way to make Catherine feel welcome? When was the last time you defended her when others were being critical? When was the last time you included her in something without making her feel like she had to earn her place?" The questions hung in the air unanswered. Camilla's silence was more damning than any admission could have been. "She cried herself to sleep last night," William continued, his voice raw with emotion. "My wife, the mother of my children, the future Queen of England, cried herself to sleep because she feels unwanted in her own home. Because people who should be supporting her have instead been tearing her down." Camilla's composure finally cracked completely. "You think this is easy for me? You think I don't feel the pressure too? Everyone is watching, everyone is judging. I'm trying to establish my own place in this family, my own role. It's not simple, William. So you decided to make it harder for Catherine instead of working together? William's voice was incredulous. You could have been allies. You could have supported each other. Instead, you chose to see her as competition. That's not. Camilla started, but William cut her off. It is exactly that. You saw a young, beautiful, popular woman joining the family, and instead of welcoming her, you felt threatened by her. The accusation hit home, and Camilla's face went pale. She sank back into her chair, her carefully constructed defenses finally crumbling. You don't understand the position I'm in, she whispered. I'm not naturally loved the way she is. People don't take to me the way they take to Catherine. I have to work twice as hard for half the acceptance. For a moment, William's anger softened as he saw the vulnerability behind Camilla's hostility. But then, he thought of Catherine's tears, of her whispered doubts about whether she belonged, and his resolve hardened again. That's not Catherine's fault, he said firmly. She didn't ask to be more popular, and she certainly doesn't deserve to be punished for it. Your struggles don't give you the right to make hers worse. Camilla looked up at him with eyes that were beginning to glisten with unshed tears. I never meant. I didn't realize I was being so cruel, William supplied when she couldn't find the word. Because that's what it's been, Camilla. Cruel and unnecessary and beneath the dignity of this family. The word hung between them like a blade. Camilla flinched as if she'd been physically struck. I was trying to help her become the best royal she could be, she said weakly. By breaking her spirit? By making her question her worth? By treating her like an interloper instead of family? William's voice was heavy with disappointment. That's not help, Camilla. That's sabotage. Outside the window, clouds had begun to gather, casting shadows across the room. The metaphor was not lost on either of them. A storm was brewing, and the atmosphere in the palace was about to change dramatically. What do you want from me, William? Camilla asked quietly, her voice small and defeated. William studied her for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. The next few sentences would determine not just the future of Catherine's place in the family, but the entire dynamic between the key players in the royal household. I want you to remember that Catherine is not your enemy, he said finally. I want you to remember that we're supposed to be family, and I want you to start treating my wife with the respect and kindness she deserves. Camilla nodded slowly, but William wasn't finished. Because if this continues, he continued, his voice taking on a steel edge that made the queen consort look up sharply. If Catherine continues to be made to feel unwelcome, if the subtle attacks and undermining continue, then you and I are going to have a much bigger problem than this conversation. The threat was unmistakable, and Camilla understood exactly what William was telling her. The future king of England was drawing a line in the sand, and she could either respect it or face the consequences. The palace walls seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the confrontation, as if the very foundations of the royal household were shifting beneath the weight of this long-overdue reckoning. The silence that followed William's ultimatum was deafening. Camilla sat motionless in her chair, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly as the full weight of his words sank in. For the first time in years, she looked genuinely afraid. You would threaten me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You would threaten your father's wife? William's expression didn't soften. I'm protecting my wife. And if that means having difficult conversations with family members who are making her life miserable, then, yes, I'll have those conversations. Camilla stood up slowly, her movements careful and measured. She walked to a portrait on the wall, a formal painting of the late Queen Elizabeth, and stared at it, as if seeking guidance from beyond. Your grandmother would never have approved of this kind of confrontation, she said quietly. My grandmother would never have approved of family members being cruel to one another either, William shot back. She believed in duty, honor, and treating people with dignity. What you've been doing goes against everything she stood for. The mention of Queen Elizabeth seemed to hit Camilla harder than any of William's previous words. She had worked so hard to earn the late Queen's acceptance, to prove herself worthy of her place in the family. The suggestion that she was dishonoring that memory was clearly devastating. I loved your grandmother, Camilla said, her voice thick with emotion. I would never do anything to dishonor her memory. Then, start acting like it, William replied firmly. Start treating Catherine the way my grandmother would have expected you to treat her. Camilla turned away from the portrait, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. The carefully maintained facade of royal composure had completely crumbled, revealing the insecure woman beneath. I never had a daughter, she whispered. I never had that relationship, never knew how to. I suppose I saw Catherine as someone who might fill that role. But then, she was so perfect, so naturally good at everything. And I felt inadequate. William's anger began to ebb slightly as he saw the genuine pain in Camilla's confession. But his protective instincts for Catherine remained strong. So instead of embracing that relationship, you decided to tear her down? He asked, his voice still hard, but no longer quite as cold. I thought if I could help her avoid mistakes, if I could teach her the hard lessons I had to learn. I thought I was being helpful. Camilla wiped her eyes with a tissue from her desk. I realize now how it must have seemed to her. It seemed like you hated her, William said bluntly. It seemed like you wanted her to fail. The words hit Camilla like physical blows. She sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Oh God, she whispered. What have I done? For a moment, William felt a flicker of sympathy for the woman who had tried so hard to find her place in a family that had initially rejected her. But then, he thought of Catherine's tears, her self-doubt, her whispered fears that she would never be good enough, and his resolve strengthened again. You've hurt someone who never did anything to deserve it, he said quietly. You've made the woman I love question her worth and her place in this family. You've created an atmosphere of tension and anxiety that has affected everyone around you. Camilla looked up at him through her tears. How can I fix this, William? How can I make this right? Start by acknowledging what you've done, William said. Not just to me, but to Catherine. Start by taking responsibility for your actions instead of making excuses. And then, you start treating her like the family member she is. You start supporting her instead of undermining her. You start building her up instead of tearing her down. William's voice grew stronger with each word. You start acting like the mother figure you claim you wanted to be instead of the critic you've actually been. Camilla nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. She must hate me. She doesn't hate you, William said, and for the first time since the conversation began, his voice held a note of gentleness. Catherine doesn't have hate in her heart. She's confused, she's hurt, but she doesn't hate anyone. That's what makes this so much worse. You've been attacking someone who would never attack you back. The observation seemed to cause Camilla physical pain. She doubled over slightly, as if the weight of her guilt was pressing down on her. I need to talk to her, she said suddenly, looking up at William with desperate eyes. I need to apologize, to explain. No, William said firmly, holding up a hand. Not yet. Catherine needs time to process this. She needs to see real change before she'll believe any apologies are genuine. Camilla's face fell. How long? However long it takes, William replied. This isn't going to be fixed with one conversation or one grand gesture. This is going to require consistent, genuine change in how you treat her. The queen consort nodded slowly, beginning to understand the magnitude of what lay ahead. What about Charles? What about your father? William's jaw tightened. What about him? He'll need to know about this conversation. About the accusations. The accusations? William's voice rose again. These aren't accusations, Camilla. These are facts. And if my father has been blind to what's been happening under his own roof, then maybe it's time he opened his eyes. Camilla paled at the implication. William, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not making anything harder, William said coldly. I'm making it clear that this behavior stops now. Whether my father chooses to address it or ignore it is up to him. But I won't stand by and watch it continue. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. If Charles chose to ignore or excuse Camilla's treatment of Catherine, he would find himself at odds with his son and heir. The potential for a major family rift was suddenly very real. You would divide this family over this? Camilla asked, fear creeping into her voice. You already divided this family, William replied. I'm just pointing it out. The truth of his words hit home with devastating force. Camilla realized that her actions hadn't just hurt Catherine. They had created fault lines that could tear the entire royal household apart. Outside, the storm clouds that had been gathering finally opened up, sending rain against the windows and sheets. The weather seemed to mirror the emotional tempest that had been unleashed in the queen consort's sitting room. I'm scared, William, Camilla admitted quietly. I'm scared that it's too late, that I've damaged things beyond repair. William looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the queen consort or his father's wife, but a woman who had made terrible mistakes and was finally beginning to understand their cost. It's not too late, he said finally. But it will be if you don't start making real changes immediately. The conversation had reached a turning point. The anger and accusations had given way to hard truths and the possibility of redemption. But William's next words would make it clear that this was Catherine's last chance to get things right. Because if you hurt her again, he said, his voice quiet but filled with unmistakable menace. If I see one more tear, one more moment of self-doubt, one more instance of you making my wife feel unwelcome in her own home, then this conversation will seem gentle by comparison. The palace walls seemed to shudder with the intensity of his words, and Camilla understood that she was standing at a crossroads that would determine not just her relationship with Catherine, but her entire future within the royal family. The rain continued to pound against the windows as William turned to leave, his message delivered with crystal clarity. But, as his hand touched the door handle, Camilla's voice stopped him. "Wait," she called out, her voice cracking with emotion. "Please, William, just wait." He paused but didn't turn around immediately. The tension in his shoulders was visible, his patience clearly worn thin by months of watching Catherine suffer in silence. "There's something else," Camilla continued, her voice barely audible. "Something you need to know." William slowly turned back to face her, wariness written across his features. "What?" Camilla wrung her hands, struggling to find the words. "The comments about Catherine's family, some of them, they weren't just from me." A dangerous stillness settled over William. "What are you saying?" "There have been others," Camilla whispered, looking anywhere but at William's face. "Other family members, some of the older generation. They've made comments, expressed concerns about Catherine's background, her family's business dealings, whether she truly understands her role." William's face darkened like the storm clouds outside. "And instead of defending her, you joined in." I thought if I was critical too, if I pointed out areas where she needed improvement, that it would somehow protect her from harsher judgment later." Camilla's explanation sounded weak even to her own ears. "Protect her?" William's voice was deadly quiet. "By attacking her yourself?" "I know how it sounds," Camilla said desperately. "But I thought if I could guide her, shape her into what they expected, then the criticism would stop." William stared at her in disbelief. "So you decided to break her down to build her up? You decided to make her feel worthless so she could become worthy?" The logic, when stated so plainly, was clearly flawed and cruel. Camilla's face crumpled as she realized how twisted her reasoning had been. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I was so very wrong." "Who else?" William demanded, his voice cutting through the air like ice. "Who else has been making these comments?" Camilla hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to other family members and the crushing weight of William's anger. "I need names, Camilla. Your Aunt Margaret has made several comments about Catherine's mother and the party planning business. She feels it's beneath royal standards." Camilla spoke reluctantly, each word seeming to cause her physical pain. William's jaw clenched tighter. "Who else?" "Some of the older courtiers, people who've been around the palace for decades. They've expressed concerns about Catherine's ability to handle the pressure, about whether someone from her background can truly understand the weight of royal responsibility. And you listened to this poison and decided to add your own." William's voice rose again. "I thought I was being realistic," Camilla said weakly. "I thought if I acknowledged their concerns, if I worked to address them with Catherine, that I could help her overcome them. By destroying her confidence, by making her feel like she had to apologize for who she is and where she comes from." William took a step closer to Camilla, his presence overwhelming. "Do you have any idea what you've put her through?" Camilla nodded miserably. "I'm beginning to understand." "No, you're not," William said harshly. "You can't possibly understand what it's like to walk into a room and wonder if everyone is judging you. You can't understand what it's like to have your every word analyzed, your every gesture critiqued. You can't understand what it's like to love someone so much that you're willing to endure constant criticism just to be with them." Each word hit Camilla like a physical blow. She had indeed experienced some of these feelings when she first joined the royal family, but she had forgotten how painful they were. "She's never complained," William continued, his voice raw with emotion. "Not once has Catherine come to me and said she couldn't handle the pressure. Not once has she asked me to defend her or fight her battles. She's absorbed every criticism, every slight, every moment of coldness, and tried to use it to become better." Camilla's tears flowed more freely now. "I didn't realize. She's stronger than all of you combined," William interrupted. "She's faced more scrutiny and judgment in the past few years than most people face in a lifetime. And she's done it with grace and dignity. And instead of protecting her, instead of celebrating her strength, you've been trying to break her." The accusation hung in the air between them, undeniable and devastating. Camilla had no defense left, no excuse that could justify her behavior. What can I do? She asked desperately. How can I fix this? William studied her for a long moment, weighing whether her remorse was genuine or simply fear of being caught. You can start by understanding that Catherine doesn't need to be fixed, he said finally. She doesn't need to be shaped or molded or improved. She needs to be supported and loved and defended. But the others, the criticism, let me worry about the others, William said, his voice taking on a steely edge that made Camilla shiver. If Aunt Margaret has concerns about Catherine's family, she can bring them to me. If the courtiers think Catherine isn't suitable, they can find new positions elsewhere. The implication was clear. William was prepared to take on anyone who continued to make Catherine feel unwelcome, regardless of their position or relationship to the family. You would go against your own family for her? Camilla asked, a note of awe creeping into her voice. Catherine is my family, William replied without hesitation. She's my wife, the mother of my children, my partner in everything that matters. And if other people can't accept that, can't treat her with the respect she deserves, then they're choosing to exclude themselves from our lives. The declaration was powerful and uncompromising. Camilla realized that she was witnessing the moment when William finally drew his line in the sand, when he chose his wife and children over anyone else's comfort or convenience. I understand, she said quietly. Do you? William challenged. Because this isn't just about being nicer to Catherine at dinner parties. This is about fundamentally changing how you think about her, how you treat her, how you speak about her when she's not in the room. Camilla nodded slowly. I know. And I know it will take time for her to trust me again, if she ever does. It will take more than time, William said bluntly. It will take consistent action and genuine change. Catherine is too smart and too intuitive to be fooled by surface politeness. The storm outside was beginning to calm, but inside the sitting room, the emotional tempest was far from over. William's next words would set the course for how the royal family would function moving forward. I'm going to tell Catherine about this conversation, he said, watching Camilla's face carefully. I'm going to tell her that you've acknowledged your behavior and committed to changing it. But I'm also going to tell her that she doesn't owe you forgiveness just because you've apologized. Camilla's face went white. William, please, she gets to decide how and when to rebuild her relationship with you, William continued. She gets to set the pace, the terms, the boundaries. Your job is to respect whatever decision she makes and prove through your actions that you've truly changed. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Camilla, who had spent years trying to establish her authority within the family, now found herself completely at the mercy of the woman she had been trying to diminish. And if she decides she can't forgive me? Camilla asked, her voice small. William's expression was unreadable. Then, you'll have to live with the consequences of your choices. The finality of his words settled over the room like a shroud. The palace walls had indeed shaken, and when the dust settled, nothing would ever be quite the same again. William left Camilla's sitting room with purposeful strides, his confrontation complete, but his work far from finished. The conversation had been necessary but painful, and now came the harder task of helping Catherine heal from months of subtle cruelty and undermining. He found her in their private garden, sitting on a stone bench beneath an ancient oak tree. She was reading a book, but William could tell from the way she held it that her mind was elsewhere. The morning rain had stopped, leaving everything fresh and clean, but Catherine's posture spoke of someone carrying a heavy burden. Darling, he said softly as he approached, not wanting to startle her. Catherine looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. How was your morning? You left quite early. William sat beside her on the bench, taking her hand in his. I had something I needed to take care of. Something important. Catherine's smile faded as she saw the seriousness in his expression. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong anymore, William said carefully. But we need to talk about what has been wrong. Catherine set her book aside and turned to face him fully. I don't understand. William took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. I know you've been struggling, Catherine. I know you've been feeling unwelcome here, feeling like you don't belong. I know about the comments, the slights, the way certain people have been treating you. Catherine's face went pale. William, I never said. You didn't need to say anything, he interrupted gently. I could see it. In the way your smile became forced at family gatherings. In the way you second-guessed yourself before speaking. In the way you cried last night when you thought I was asleep. Tears welled up in Catherine's eyes. I didn't want to cause problems. I didn't want to come between you and your family. You're not causing problems, William said firmly, cupping her face in his hands. The people who've been making you feel this way are the ones causing problems. It's complicated, William. I know I don't have the same background as everyone else. I know I make mistakes. Stop, William said, his voice gentle but commanding. Stop making excuses for people who should know better. Stop blaming yourself for other people's cruelty. Catherine searched his face, seeing something there that made her heart race. What did you do? I had a conversation with Camilla this morning, William said simply. A long overdue conversation about how she's been treating you. Catherine's eyes widened with alarm. Oh no, William. You didn't need to do that. You shouldn't have. I absolutely should have, William said firmly. I should have done it months ago. I should never have let it go on as long as I did. But now she'll think I complained to you, that I can't handle. Catherine, listen to me, William interrupted, taking both her hands in his. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. You have conducted yourself with more grace and dignity than anyone could have expected. You have absorbed criticism and hostility that would have broken lesser people. You have tried to fit in, to please everyone, to be perfect, and it's not your job to do any of those things. The tears Catherine had been holding back finally spilled over. But what if they're right? What if I really don't belong here? What if I'm not good enough? Don't you dare finish that sentence, William said, his voice fierce with protectiveness. Don't you dare question your worth because small-minded people can't see what's right in front of them. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she finally let herself cry. Months of stored-up hurt and frustration poured out of her, and William simply held her, letting her release all the pain she had been carrying alone. You are extraordinary, he whispered into her hair. You are kind and intelligent and strong. You have brought joy and warmth to this family, even to the people who've been too blind to appreciate it. You have made me a better person, a better prince, a better man. Catherine pulled back to look at him, her eyes red but no longer filled with self-doubt. What did Camilla say? William hesitated, not wanting to hurt Catherine further, but knowing she deserved the truth. She acknowledged that she's been treating you poorly. She admitted that she's been critical and unwelcoming, and she expressed regret for her actions. Did she explain why? Catherine asked quietly. She gave reasons, William said carefully. But there are no good excuses for how she's behaved. Fear, insecurity, jealousy, none of those justify making you feel unwelcome in your own home. Catherine nodded slowly, processing this information. What happens now? Now, things change, William said with conviction. The atmosphere in this household changes. The way people treat you changes. And if they don't change willingly, then I'll make sure they change circumstances. Catherine could hear the steel in his voice and understood that her husband had reached the end of his patience with anyone who would hurt her. I don't want to be the cause of family divisions, she said softly. You're not the cause, William replied firmly. Their behavior is the cause. Your only crime was being yourself, and that's not a crime at all. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Catherine processing everything she'd heard. Finally, she spoke again. Do you think she meant it? Camilla's regret. William considered the question carefully. I think she's finally realized the impact of her actions. Whether that translates to genuine change remains to be seen. But, Catherine, you don't have to forgive her just because she apologized. You don't owe her anything. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. I've never been good at holding grudges, she said finally. But I also can't pretend that months of hurtful behavior can be erased with one conversation. Then, don't pretend, William said. Take whatever time you need. Set whatever boundaries feel right to you. This is about your comfort and your healing, not about making anyone else feel better about their poor choices. Catherine leaned against William's shoulder, feeling a weight lifting from her chest that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, William replied, kissing the top of her head. And, I promise you, no one will ever make you feel unwelcome in your own home again. Not while I draw breath. As they sat together in their garden, the sun finally broke through the remaining clouds, casting everything in golden light. The palace around them seemed different somehow, as if the confrontation that morning had shifted something fundamental in its very foundations. Inside the grand halls, word of William's confrontation with Camilla was already beginning to spread among the staff. The prince's protective stance toward his wife sent a clear message throughout the household. Catherine was to be treated with the respect and kindness due to a future queen, and anyone who couldn't manage that would find themselves on the wrong side of the future king. Camilla, meanwhile, remained in her sitting room, staring out at the gardens where William and Catherine sat together. She could see their heads close together, could see the way William held his wife protectively, and, for the first time, she truly understood what she had almost destroyed. The palace had indeed shaken that morning, not from any physical force, but from the emotional earthquake that occurred when a devoted husband finally said enough to those who would hurt the woman he loved. The aftershocks would be felt for years to come, but Catherine would never again face them alone. In the end, love had triumphed over politics, protection had overcome politeness, and the future king had shown that when it came to choosing between his wife's happiness and everyone else's comfort, there was no choice at all. The palace walls had witnessed many dramas over the centuries, but few as decisive or as necessary as the moment William finally drew his line in the sand and dared anyone to cross it. The storm had passed, both literally and figuratively, and in its wake, a new understanding had emerged. Catherine belonged not because she had earned it through perfection, but because she was loved completely and unconditionally by the man who would one day be king. And that, as it turned out, was all the qualification she had ever needed.